Well, I'll tell you the ones that I've been working on lately, and it has to do in large part because of my recent work on Barack Obama's dreams from my father. One is the theme of raising yourself, often without a parent, sometimes without both parents. In the case of Obama, raising yourself to be a black man with no models before you. But you know, you can broaden that and say raising yourself to be a black adult with no models before you. And that can be the case. A third theme that I work on is finding a home elsewhere. One of my favorite quotes from Frederick Douglass is, when he was a boy, he said, you know, I don't know the days of the week. I didn't know the days of the week or the months of the year, but I knew I had to find a home elsewhere. And then, particularly in terms of what I've been working on now, finding the personality you need to deal with abandonment and to find yourself in those terms. Now, all of those are some rather stark themes, but I would just also add more generally the theme of finding community, making community, and finding the voices, the music, if you will, that will make community. I'm thinking here of Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, in which one of the wonderful things that happens is that you see Pilate and her daughter and her granddaughter singing to each other, and through song, among other things, making a home for each other and so forth. And this whole business of making a home and making a community is very important, it seems to me. Well, these are themes that you find in autobiography, yes. Another one I would mention related to the business of finding a home elsewhere is the theme of migration. One of the most important books I've read in the last couple of years is Ira Berlin's The Making of African America. And one of the things that's important is that he says, you know, we often refer to the Great Migration and in saying that refer to the migration at the beginning of the 20th century, beginning roughly around World War I and going into the mid-century, perhaps up to 1960, 1970 and so forth. But he argues that there's actually been 4 migrations. Obviously the one that brought Africans to the New World to begin with, Middle Passage, let us call it. But then there's the second one, which we don't always talk about, but it's quite significant. The migration at the beginning of the 19th century, which led to no less than 1.5 million slaves being brought from the eastern shore of the country, mostly from Virginia and South Carolina, west and south. 1.5 million people going west and south, and that creating, as I like to tell my students, you know, you want to know how Mississippi was created, or Alabama, or even the population, black population in Texas. You know, this was the migration that did that. The third one being the migration of the millions of people who left mostly the South for northern cities in the first half of the 20th century. And right now, according to Berlin, and I think he's right, we're in the midst of a 4th migration. And the 4th migration involves the people who have arrived in the United States since 1990. There's some fascinating statistics along those lines. For example, the whole idea that very soon half of the black people in New York City will be immigrants, or the whole idea that 1/4 of black Americans right now are immigrant. These are really startling figures. I mention these 4 migrations because there's a literature that goes with each. The Charles Johnson's novel Middle Passage, for example, published in 1995. That's just but one example of how we imagine or reimagine Middle Passage and black people coming to the New World. Most anything about early Louisiana or early Florida and so forth would correspond to the second migration. When Frederick Douglass attempts to escape from slavery in 1838, and that doesn't happen. Pardon me, 1836. The one thing he fears is that he will be sold south. That his punishment for trying to escape is that he would be sold south. That is an expression of that. So you get what I would call in the literature the creation of an African American map, an African American geography. There is, and in fact, every group has their own map. Every group, every person. I teach, of course, an American autobiography, and one of the things I tell my students, I say to them, think about your own map. You know, United States is 50 states, but you don't live in all 50. What is your map? Autobiography in this country is very much about inventing yourself as a citizen, and it's important to have the examples from every group in terms of people inventing themselves as citizens. I've already touched on one thing in terms of autobiography and place. Your sense of place, your sense of your own personal geography. African Americans have written about that as well, whether it is the geography of freedom or the geography of a particular family, and so forth. Autobiography, another way to approach autobiography is to think about autobiographical strategies. When I teach, I stress autobiography in work, autobiography in place, the use of photographs in autobiography, writing another in order to write yourself. And there are many examples in African American autobiography of writers pursuing those strategies. My feeling is that it was a Renaissance because there was the flourishing of multiple art forms. It wasn't just literature or music or something like that. What makes a Renaissance is, tremendous vital activity in many art forms. And one of the things that I'm going to show today are several books in which images and poetry and other art decorations and so forth come together to make the book. And when you see the visual and the verbal and so forth, you get a sense that a Renaissance is going on because the poetry's new and the images are new and so forth. There are some key artists to think of in terms of the Harlem Renaissance. Interestingly enough, they're not all African American. For example, when The New Negro came out, very important book, 1925, the art was done principally by three people. One was Vinyl Reese, a German American. One was Aaron Douglas, an African American, and the third was Miguel Covarrubias, a Mexican. So one of the things to be aware of is that there was a range of artists participating in it. Aaron Douglas, who I just mentioned, was a major artist of the period. Richard Nugent was another one. Then there were women artists such as Laura Wheeler. Later she's known as Laura Wheeler Waring. Lois Jones. They were doing tremendous work, not just with the books, but also with the magazines, and also just art in general for exhibitions and so forth. Now, art was very much a part of the Harlem Renaissance.